Thank you again for having me and allowing me to talk about a part of airport development that is very unique and something that is very personal to me since I've been doing it for so long. And that is the airport baggage handling systems, of course. And looking at total cost of ownership of these systems. It's something that isn't necessarily thought of too much in the development of terminals facilities, but something that's very important. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what TCO is, total cost of ownership of a traditional asset generically. You know, there are basically four aspects to it, four steps to it. You have the acquisition up front, the purchase of the equipment, the install, the construction. We go into operations of it. How do we effectively use the asset? And of course, maintenance of it. And then finally, salvage. What happens to it when it's done at the end of its useful life? With baggage handling systems, it's a little unique. Because first of all, salvage is fairly negligible when it comes to the cost of a system. A lot of times what airports do is require the baggage handling system contractor that's building the new system, scrap the old one, leave it in an area of the airport where their maintenance folks can go and grab whatever parts they can from the junk pile for potential use in the future. There may be some tax breaks and tax implications to salvage, but it's fairly negligible, and we're not going to really discuss that here. A piece of the upfront aspect of this, however, is the design of a system. This is the most important part of the project, of the life cycle, and affects the entire life cycle of the project. So we're going to get into that quite a bit here, but that's part of the baggage handling system life cycle, the total cost of ownership. Now, ultimately, there are some intangibles, and we'll get into these a little bit, and that is customer experience, what happens with the average flyer and how the baggage handling system impacts that. The airport's brand or the airline's brand image can be hugely impacted by the journey of a bag through the process. And then employee satisfaction. This really applies to the working conditions within the baggage handling system, both upfront and at the end. And it's for maintenance folks, it's for the bag handlers, it's for everything. So it's something that we're going to talk a little bit about as well. Now, we were successful in starting a process with the Airport Cooperative Research Program to develop a study on total cost of ownership. Now, for those of you who don't know the ACRP, ACRP is a subset of the Transportation Research Board, the TRB. That is the arm of the National Academies of Sciences that is funded by the Department of Transportation, including FAA. FAA funds the ACRP to do a number of studies every year. That's something that the industry is in need of. Sidebar here, so for those of you who don't know, the National Academies of Sciences was founded back in the 1860s by Abraham Lincoln to model the Royal Academies of Science, to bring academia in to solve problems. And back in the 1860s, we had a war going on, so the National Academies was looked at not only for militarily, but just from a governmental perspective. So anyway, sidebar on that. So ACRP put out a query for someone to come and do this study on total cost of ownership. We were awarded, or we were notified that we won the contract back in 2019, but it wasn't awarded until 2020. What was happening in 2020? A pandemic. So it took a little longer to complete the report and also for them to publish it. Now, this was supposed to be built upon a research report that had been done previously on life cycle costs of various assets of an airport. The one major piece that was missing from that report, because it's very difficult to quantify, was baggage handling systems. So that's why it was a separate project. So it morphed into a project to help airport stakeholders figure out how they're going to incorporate best cost-benefit analyses into procurement of baggage handling systems, how you look at delivery methods, look at those variable and fixed costs that goes into it, and then those intangibles like we talked about, customer experience, so on and so forth. The URL here at the bottom is where you can find the report, but if you just Google it for ACRP Research Report 252, you'll find it. Now, the approach of this with most ACRP studies is to first start with a literature review. understand what has already been written and discussed about total cost of ownership generically, as well as for baggage handling systems. And as you might come to find out, there really wasn't much, especially on baggage handling systems. So our approach originally was to do roundtable discussions with industry and thought leaders and trade shows. Well, that all came to a screeching halt. Everything had to be done virtually. So we did a number of virtual town halls, virtual interviews with all different stakeholders: airport executives, airline folks, corporate real estates, original equipment manufacturers, the folks that actually build it, and of course the people that actually operate and maintain them. And we also looked at other industries such as the material handling industry and railroads. Now, as you can appreciate, there were limitations. One of the starkest limitation was a number of the folks that I consider and some of my colleagues considered as big stalwarts in the industry and really understanding this. A lot of folks took early retirement during the pandemic, so those people weren't available, couldn't even find them. So we had to pivot a little bit, but we were successful in performing dozens of interviews that really helped form the reports. Now, the resulting of the project was a study, a report that talked about our process, and it defined what TCO was for baggage. Capital expenditures, or CapEx, versus what it takes to operate and maintain, or the OpEx expenditures. Included in that were maintenance costs, the operating, the staff, spare parts, things like that. The variables and considerations, things that can directly impact the costs versus things that you need to think about and that will eventually impact the costs but aren't really tangible. The impact of stakeholder engagement, whether you start the process of bringing all the folks up front, or you wait until the project is under construction, and we'll get into that a little bit more. The type of technology, and this is key, because the primary construct of a baggage handling system is what's considered conventional conveyor. It's belting on a slider bed. Think about when you go to a ticket counter in an airport and that belt you see behind it. Most systems in the US is just like that throughout the system. It's old technology. Things have improved. The types of propellant, type of motors have become more energy efficient. Tracking capabilities have improved, but really the base technology hasn't changed for 40 years. There are newer technologies available, and how you look at selecting that and what those impacts are to TCO. Energy efficiency, and just a little sidebar on this too, I was really dumbfounded to find that airports within the United States don't even think about energy efficiency of baggage handling systems, other than the motors. They want to. It's more of a subjective thing. It's more of a conscientious, ethical thing that airports are looking at from the environmental perspective, but they don't quantify it. Baggage handling systems are not metered separately from other systems within an airport. So there's only one airport in the country that does this, and they can tell you what the energy consumption of that baggage handling system is. There are no other ones, and that's something hopefully we can change in the coming years. Security considerations. Most systems, the bigger systems, have the baggage screening process inherent within the heart of the baggage handling system. If you think back to the tragic events of 9/11, all of a sudden we as an industry had to scramble and to put that process and perform open heart surgery on baggage handling systems to incorporate that screening process. So it's a big consideration when you're doing a new bag system. Funding mechanisms. As you probably recall, during the pandemic, there were a number of laws passed to help transportation as a whole improve facilities while the system was down. So there was the bipartisan infrastructure law that helped out, various funding mechanisms that we were able to look at. So this helped a lot as we went along. So this report was put out, and what was also included in this as an enhancement to the process was not a calculation, not a calculator for airport stakeholders, but a decision assist toolkit that stakeholders could use to figure out how they want to configure their system. It's an interactive PDF that they could use to look at, and we'll go through each page of it, or some pieces of it. And it really helps with various things: the design considerations, what goes into a baggage system, how you're going to procure the system, looking at technology, and then some of the operational considerations. So the procurement methodologies, there are a number of ways to procure a system, but the primary ones that come out are design, bid, build, which is the traditional start the design, take it to 100%, and then put it out to bid. Design build is becoming more prevalent in our industry as airline stakeholders are realizing, and airport stakeholders are realizing, that even though we can take a design up to 100%, it has to be vendor neutral. And every baggage vendor designs and builds their systems a little differently. So even though you take it to 100%, those original equipment manufacturers, those OEMs, still have to perform some design. So why don't we bring them in earlier, establish the footprint of the system, the size requirements, the performance of the system at a 30%, say, and then have them take ownership of the design. So that's design build. Construction manager at risk, CMAR, all that does is shift the risk from the airport to the construction manager, and then they procure the system, whether through design build or design bid build. So this goes through a number of categories of if you're looking for these things like transparent costs. If you want to have a real solid understanding of the design of the costs throughout the process, design bid build is probably the way to go. If you want it faster, design build is really the only way to do it. So there's a number of criteria here that can be used that airports can look at. We also look at the options and looking at what does the system have to be. You need to know how big it's going to be. You need to know, and by looking at the flight schedule and doing an analysis of how many ticket counters do we have to have, how many output devices do we have to have, what are the screening requirements of it. We do that through a number of factors, and the designer takes this and starts the process. Outbound bag room configuration, when the bags are delivered to an area, a makeup area where airlines have to take the bags and drive them out to the airplane, or direct load with some technologies. Every airline does it a little differently. You need to understand that. Customer experience, again, how we deal with the bag throughout its journey. Because when you think about the journey, you think about travel, air travel, your first experience is baggage, dropping it off, and your last experience is picking it up. If you screw one of those up somewhere along the line, that's going to be the first or last thing that the customer thinks of. And the middle of the journey could be a wonderful experience. They're going to think about, oh, such and such airport, they lost my bag, or oh, my bag is damaged, those darn airline workers. So it's something we need to think about when we build a new system. Design schedule. Again, are we looking at are we looking at a shortened time frame because the system is at the end of its useful life? Are we at capacity? Do we have to expand? There are methodologies you can do to improve on schedule too. Redundancy, whether it's mechanical or electrical, different stakeholders look at this differently, and those are incorporated into the design. Access is something, equipment access, we shouldn't even have to think about this. Bottom line is, if you don't make the system accessible for maintenance, it will not be maintained properly, and your useful life will be shortened. So it's something that you need to really consider when doing the design, making sure there's adequate space, adequate lighting. It's a safe working atmosphere. So things like that need to be considered. Some design considerations. Now this worksheet really, it's more to be demonstrative than an easy quantification. It allows airport stakeholders to look at how are different decisions that I make going to affect the cost of the system, whether it's CapEx or whether it's going to be on the operational expenditures. So this primarily looks at capital expenditures and how they can be offset. Am I looking at, for an outbound bag room configuration, do I want to deliver bags directly to the gate, or am I going to have a centralized area that can be used by multiple airlines for flexibility? So those considerations. Again, the customer service aspect. Are we going to have remote bag drop from a parking garage or from a rental car facility? Those things have big impact on the design. And again, redundancy. Is it manual? Is it automated? How are we going to configure that? That's going to be something. So this really is to get airport stakeholders thinking about it. Because when you think of a lot of airport directors, maybe some of you will be in those roles in the future, might not have a deep understanding of all the systems at an airport. So this gets them thinking of it and those systems. We also looked at technology now, and really these days there's two methodologies, there's two technologies used for baggage systems. We mentioned the conventional conveyor. There's also what's called an individual carrier system. Now this is a generic term. It could be automated guided vehicles, it could be tote systems. All in all, we use it generically. What's really being used today from an ICS perspective our tow systems. So there's different things, there's different areas, and again, this isn't supposed to tell the airport this is what you need to build. What it does is tell them, hey, of all these factors, the way you've ranked them, it lets them know that, well, maybe you should consider ICS. Or in some cases, it might be, nope, don't even think about it. You've got a small system, and you don't have the funding, you don't have the budgets, and your space is just limited. So if you look at these areas, what it will do as you check these boxes off, it'll tell you, yep, you should probably go with an ICS based on your rankings, and you can go from there with that. So it's really a tool. It's really to help with the assist. Capital expenditures versus operational expenditures, or CapEx, OpEx considerations. This is just something to get the airports thinking. Looking at maintenance downtime, looking at mean time to repair. Where you are in the country, are you in the middle of nowhere versus a metropolitan area? What kind of staff are you going to be able to hire to maintain the system and operate the system? How do you integrate asset management of the baggage handling system with respect to your airport as a whole? If that's done up front, it's a lot easier to do than to try to apply it later on. Again, the energy efficiency. Is that something that's really important to the airport? And what mechanisms can be done to ensure that we can capture exactly what this BHS is consuming? So again, just some tools. Operational. Again, these are something to allow an airport to look at. How can we look at the operations? How can we look at aspects of, here are my desired metrics. This is what I need. And you can hover over the question marks and it'll describe each one of them even better. What are the external factors of that? And how does it impact my budget overall? So these are considerations from an operational standpoint. So finally, just a culmination of the reports. I will tell you that I was very, I'll just say, disappointed at the outcome of the reports. Unfortunately, there was not a lot of appetite within the industry, the U.S. industry anyway, to look at total cost of ownership. Internationally, very well understood. For example, a lot of Canadian airports, the way they're funded, they're self-funded, so they think of themselves as nonprofit organizations. They need to consider TCO for them to survive. So it's very important. So, but there are a number of airports in the country here that do have a very deep understanding of these metrics, and they incorporate TCO qualifications and characteristics into their systems and their procurements. Unfortunately, the way some airports are managed and funded, they're very limited. For example, a couple of state airports, when they go out to bid, they have to go low bidder. So sometimes that does not allow them to get creative in the procurement process. So in order to affect that, we need to make sure that the design accounts for it before then. There is a growing attitude towards technology in the U.S. Now, even today, though, you'll see that it might be new here to use in the U.S. It's already been used in Europe somewhere, for example. If you've traveled lately and you've seen some of the automated bin return systems at checkpoints where you put your bag in, the tub is automatically transferred through the X-ray machine out the back, and then it's automatically returned. That's been in use in Europe for 20 years. This is not new stuff. So there is a growing, we joke in the industry that instead of designing for 40-year-old technology, we're now designing for 20-year technology in the US, unfortunately. That's just the way it is. There is more interest in different procurement methodologies, as we mentioned, but again, that is still restricted for some airports in the way they manage their systems. Stakeholder engagement, I wanted to touch upon this. You may have heard the term ORAT, or Operational Readiness Activation Transition. The basic philosophy behind this is getting those stakeholders involved in the design and procurement process so they understand what it is before you just turn over the keys to them at the end, which never works. And I'll give you some examples, at least an anecdote from my perspective. One of the first projects I ever worked on was baggage handling system, and the airline, my client, wanted to give me the customer service manager to meet with every 2 weeks, the maintenance manager, the bag handling manager. Anyway, the key word here is manager. And I pushed, and I'm so happy that I did. Said, no, I want a ticket agent. I want an electrician that has to work on the system. I want an actual bag handler. Those are the people that we want involved in the design process, so that since they're the ones operating, they're the ones using it, it's their impact, their input we want. And I will tell you to this day, and this was a project that I did, started in 1998, and I think we wrapped it up in 2005. I ran into the ticket agent that was on our team maybe 10 years later. Her name was Erin. And I saw her at the airport. She came running up to me, gave me a hug. She was so happy about the project. And that's the key, getting stakeholders involved up front. If they're not involved in the process, if something goes wrong, they're going to be the first ones to point out the problem. If they're involved at the front, they're going to be the first ones to try to find a solution and take ownership of it. So that'll be my message to you. If you ever are involved in a capital program that involves a baggage handling system, bring everybody into the process in the beginning. And this was a resounding theme within all of our discussions and our interviews of the process.